What's up, guys? I'm Toby here with my co-host,
Hi, hello, my name's Leroy.
and yeah, let's just jump right into it. We're going to be breaking down the six parts of Gordon Kaye's player involvement model, how they interact with each other, and how different balances are used to create different gameplay experiences, looking specifically at Team Fortress 2 and Fallout 4. We're also going to touch on the macro phase, which is the player's involvement when they are not immediately playing the game, as well as the micro phase, which is their involvement when they are playing the game. The first two involvement models we're going to talk about are narrative involvement and ludic involvement, which, despite being very different, both involve player choice and interact with each other often. Narrative involvement is essentially the story elements of the game, so it's described by Kalea as the narrative which is scripted into the game and the narrative that is generated from the ongoing interaction with the game world. So in Fallout 4's case, one can be immersed in the game's story for macro reasons, so they're thinking about the story outside of playtime, and also micro reasons, so this is, the dialogue or quests which decide where the story goes.
And it was because of you and who you are that turned things around for me. I just wanted to make sure you knew that.
TF2's narrative, on the other hand, exists entirely as macro elements, and so all the choices made in game by the players are through ludic involvement. And this is described as the player's engagement with the choices made in the game and the repercussions of those choices, and it can be spur of the moment decisions without a relation to an overarching goal. It is described by Rafael Colantonio that players make their tactical path as they play from an improvisation standpoint. This essentially boils down to the tactics used and the opportunity cost of them, and has a very short-term effect on the gameplay.
Shared involvement model can be best described as how the player interacts with entities in the same environment, whether they be human players or AI controlled, normally coming under a competitive, collaborative, or social umbrella term. Fallout 4, the game being single player, open world RPG, it's mostly based around competitive and collaborative interactions with the NPCs, although some NPCs can provide a sort of fake social interaction. In Team Fortress 2, however, with it being a first person shooter multiplayer game, it's vastly different. As Talmagrade White best puts it, when you play a multiplayer FPS video game like Counter Strike, you enter a complex social world, a subculture. And this is true for Team Fortress 2, in which at all times you are always collaborating with teammates competitively against enemies and socially, as both players don't have to shoot each other.
The controls and movement within a game fall under kinesthetic or performative involvement. It's described as all modes of avatar or game piece control in game environments, ranging from learning controls to the fluency of internalized movement. Now, Fallout 4 has fairly basic 3D world movements, and thus its kinesthetic involvement is mostly through gunplay, so that's basic aim training as well as management of VATS. TF2, on the other hand, features an engine and game design that facilitates the use of unconventional means of getting from point A to point B, such as rocket jumping, and other skills which can be developed further by the player.
The spatial involvement model, as described by Kaleha, is the process of internalizing a game space. It gives the sense that they, the player, inhabit a place. It makes the player feel like they are in the game rather than watching it to maintain their magic circle. Both Fallout 4 and Team Fortress 2 accomplish this spatial involvement in a very similar way, as they are both 3D first person shooters. A 2D game would have a much different approach to doing this, as it tries to capture a very unnatural perspective which cannot be achieved naturally. Finally, we have affective involvement, which is quite hard to talk about as it's sort of a personal connection that players develop, which is what keeps them within the magic circle, and is more player based and more personal than academic. Different games utilize each involvement model to varying degrees in order to create different experiences depending on the game feel that the developers want to evoke. Fallout 4 leans heavier on the story and choices the player can make to create a single player RPG that is solely driven by the player's actions, whereas Team Fortress 2 leans much more on the shared and kinesthetic involvement to create its unique flavor of first person shooter. Team Fortress 2, as a multiplayer FPS, focuses heavily on shared involvement with its collaborative and competitive gunplay in an environment with other players, and its use of kinesthetic involvement is a main focus with solid gunplay, spatial awareness, diverse movement skills like rocket jumping or sticky bomb jumping, and game sense being central to a player's ability to win individual fights. But to win a game, it relies heavily on its shared involvement and the player's ability to interact with teammates to coordinate. Alternatively, the game does also supply the player with tools like taunts and voice lines that can also turn entire servers into social servers, which can mean that the players will experience vastly different experiences when joining from one server to another.
Fallout 4, on the other hand, is a single-player RPG and thus features strong narrative involvement, with most player interactions in the game world given context by either a story event that's occurred or an event that the player is working towards. Shared involvement also occurs, with the player working with or against certain AI factions to reach an end goal. Player will also experience a great deal of spatial involvement, with numerous locations to explore and combat areas ranging from the cramped indoors of a vault to areas devoid of cover such as the glowing sea. In this way, Calais' model accurately provides terminology for different aspects that make up a gameplay experience, as well as the different levels to which they occur. Thus we can analyze how different games engage their players.